the first mistake. We ignored the warning signs and left too late. Hello, everyone. I'm glad you're here. Please like and subscribe so I can tell more interesting stories. Now, let's get started. I always thought the biggest mistakes in life would come with sirens or flashing lights, some kind of blaring signal. But when we left Independence, Missouri, in the spring of 1846, the warning signs were more like soft whispers we chose to ignore. The snow would come late, we told ourselves. The passes would stay open just long enough. We had time. That was the first lie. I was part of the Donner Reed Party, almost 90 of us, men, women, children, and livestock, all tied together by dusty wagons, manifest destiny, and way too much confidence. James Reed, my friend, had big dreams of California's golden promise, and George Donner was our elected leader, steady, practical, and calm. I liked George. He had this way of believing we were all going to make it. Maybe that's what made following him feel safe. We weren't the only ones heading west that spring, but we were one of the last large groups to leave. Experienced travelers knew better than to push it. Get past the Sierra Nevada before October, they'd warn. But we were slow from the start. Wagons broke down, oxen wandered, and families bickered about the pace. It didn't help that Reed's wagon was custom built and twice as heavy as the rest, looked like a rolling palace and moved like a stubborn mule. One night by the fire, I remember someone asking, "Do you think we'll make it in time?" And someone else laughed. Only if we stop stopping. Historians still debate whether our delay was truly fatal or if fate had already set its sights on us. But deep down, I think the trouble started not when the snow came, but when we placed trust in the wrong map. That map belonged to Lansford Hastings. Oh yes, the infamous Hastings Cutoff, a so-called shortcut that was about as trustworthy as a rattlesnake in your bedroll. Hastings had written this guidebook, promising a quicker path across Utah and Nevada, skipping the established route through Fort Hall. His words sounded so confident, like a guy who just read one article and declared himself an expert. We'd heard rumors that Hastings hadn't even traveled most of the route himself. But desperation makes you hopeful. We were running behind, and the idea of saving days, maybe weeks, was tempting. James Reed, always the optimist, pushed hard for the new route. He said, "If we don't take the risk, we'll never get ahead." That's how we found ourselves veering south at Fort Bridger instead of staying with the main trail. I remember the day we turned. The sun was high, and someone joked, "Shortcut starts now, bet. We're sipping California wine by fall." It would have been funny if it weren't so cursed. The next few weeks were full of confusion. The trail disappeared in spots. The terrain was awful thick, brush-steep canyons, and not a drop of water where Hastings said it would be. We chopped a road through the Wasatch Mountains ourselves, one tree at a time. Our oxen grew thinner, our tempers sharper. You haven't heard bickering until you've heard 20 families blame each other for a mountain that refuses to move. Oddly enough, that summer, wild crickets were everywhere, thousands of them chirping from dawn to dusk. Some kids collected them in jars. Some adults crushed them underfoot. It became this weird, twitchy background noise to every argument and every prayer. By the time we reached the Great Salt Lake Desert, morale was as dry as the sand we trudged across. We'd lost wagons, animals, and time. Lots of time. It took us nearly a month longer than expected to cross that so-called shortcut. That shortcut cost us our chance. We finally rejoined the main trail near the Humboldt River. The other parties long gone. The weather turning. And the mountains still waiting. It was early October when we crossed into Nevada. A strange calm fell over the camp, as if everyone silently knew we were racing something we couldn't outrun. Nights grew colder. The sun set faster, and the Sierra Nevada loomed ahead, beautiful and cruel. We camped just outside the Truckee Lake now. Donner Lake, hoping to push over the final pass the next morning. The sky was clear. The air was biting. But we thought, if we just keep going, we'll beat the snow. We didn't. That night, the storm came, not with thunder or fanfare, but with a whisper, just like everything else. It snowed for days. Thick, heavy flakes that buried the trail, the wagons, and most of our hope. We were stuck. Just a few miles from the summit. A few miles from freedom. Sometimes I dream about that ridge. About what was on the other side. Sometimes I wake up thinking we're still there. The shortcut from hell. Hastings Cutoff sounded smart until we faced the Wasatch Mountains. By the time we realized we were in trouble, it was already too late to turn back. That's the thing about shortcuts. When they go wrong, they don't just waste time, they steal it. And when you're in the wilderness with limited supplies, that's a kind of theft you never recover from. I still remember the first time we saw the Wasatch Mountains looming in front of us. We stood at the foot of them like ants, sizing up a bookshelf. They weren't part of the plan. Hastings' shortcut was supposed to save us 300 miles. Instead, it dropped us in front of a wall of stone and pine that hadn't seen a proper wagon in, well, probably ever. We didn't just get lost, we had to build the road ourselves. That meant cutting down trees, hauling rocks, and creating switchbacks up the slopes. All while our oxen stood panting ribs, wondering what kind of genius human had led them here. My hands still ache thinking about it. The axe blisters the splinters. You'd think someone would have stopped and said, "Hey, maybe we should backtrack." But no, we were too deep in it, too proud to admit we'd been duped. At one point, we sent riders ahead to look for Hastings himself. Yes, the guy who sold us this snake oil shortcut. They actually found a note from him nailed to a tree. I kid you not, it said something like, "The road ahead is very bad. Take extreme caution." That was the help we got. A memo from the wilderness warning us of the obvious. Historians still debate whether Hastings ever truly meant to deceive anyone, or if he just massively overestimated the value of his route. Some say he genuinely thought it would work. Others think he wanted to build his own little empire and needed settlers, desperate settlers like us, to blaze the trail for him. Meanwhile, every mile through the Wasatch cost us hours. Some days, we'd move 2 miles. Other days, none at all. Tensions rose. Reed clashed with other men, accusing them of slowing us down. Others fired back, blaming Reed's heavy pioneer wagon for making bad ground worse. We weren't a group anymore. We were several smaller camps, pretending to get along. And then came the Salt Flats. Imagine walking into an endless, blinding white hell. That's the Great Salt Lake Desert. Flat hot, cracked like old porcelain. The oxen struggled to find footing, and the sun made the air shimmer like a mirage. One man said it looked like God had spilled powdered sugar across the earth. Only this sugar could boil your brain in your skull. We'd been told it was 40 miles wide. It was closer to 80. With no water, no grass, and no landmarks, except the bones of animals who tried before us. That's where we lost the Graves family's oxen. They just collapsed, fell to their knees in the salt, and didn't get up. We unhitched the wagons and dragged them by hand for a while before admitting we'd have to leave them behind. The smell of sweat and blood mixed with the salt, burning your nostrils. And I haven't even told you the weird part yet. In the middle of that cursed place, we saw a lizard walk backward. I swear to you, I watched it. Tiny, scaly feet pattering backward through the sand like it was trying to unexist. Someone said it was a sign. Someone else tried to eat it. We were out there too long. By the time we made it to the Humboldt River, the oxen were skeletons. The wagons were busted, and the people not far behind. That's when we started throwing things out. Furniture, keepsakes, anything heavy. One man tossed a family Bible onto the ground like it was firewood. His wife cried for 3 straight days after that. James Reed kept pushing, always pushing. But then he snapped. Got into a full-blown fight with another man, John Snyder, over how to handle a jammed wagon. Tempers boiled, fists flew, and then Reed stabbed Snyder with a knife, killed him. Now this is where things took a turn. Reed wasn't hanged. He was exiled. They made him leave the party and go ahead to California alone. His family stayed behind. Imagine that your husband riding off alone into the unknown while you and your kids sit in a busted wagon and hope the snow doesn't come early. Oddly enough, a few days later, we saw shooting stars. Like a lot of them. Someone said it was a meteor shower. Someone else said it was the sky. Mourning John Snyder. Me. I just thought the universe was finally paying attention. Then we hit the Sierra. Massive granite cliffs, snow-capped ridges, and a trail that looked like it had been drawn by a drunk bear. We camped by Truckee Lake, just 5 miles from the summit. 5 miles? That's all that stood between us and the California sun. But Mother Nature, she had a twisted sense of humor. That night, it snowed. Then it snowed more, and then more. We woke up, buried in white silence. Couldn't move forward, couldn't move back. The wagons froze in place. The trees groaned under the weight. It wasn't a blizzard, it was a barricade. I tried to dig once, just to see how deep the snow was. The stick kept going. I gave up. That's when we realized we were trapped. And winter had only just begun. Snowfall and silence. We were just one ridge away from safety when the storms trapped us. It's strange how quiet the world gets when it's buried under snow. There were no more creaking wagon wheels. No birds. No angry shouts. Just this muffled silence, like the sky had dropped a thick white curtain on everything and hushed the entire world. The snow was up to our waists within days, and deeper still in the woods. Some wagons looked like strange lumps in the landscape, like they were being swallowed. We were stuck by Truckee Lake, only 5 miles from the summit of the Sierra Nevada. 5 miles. You could walk it in 2 hours on a summer afternoon. But in that storm might as well have been the moon. The trail vanished. The oxen couldn't move. People cried without meaning to. We all understood the same thing at once: we'd waited too long. At first, we tried to stay hopeful. We built cabins and lean-tos with whatever wood we could find. 3 rough shelters, one for the Donners, one for the Breens, and one shared between several families. They weren't homes. They were boxes that leaked and smoked and sometimes collapsed under the snow. But they were better than nothing. Food became the next obsession. We rationed what little we had. Hardtack beans, bits of bacon, grease smeared on a stick, and licked clean by the kids. We boiled rawhide from the ox yokes and chewed it like leather gum. I watched a boy try to eat pine bark. He gagged and said it tasted like dirt and fire. And still we waited, hoping the snow would melt, hoping help would come. Historians still debate whether we should have turned back before the Sierra. Some say we should have stopped in Nevada or taken shelter in the lower passes. But at that point, there wasn't any real choice. You can't undo a mountain once you're in its grip. What people don't talk about enough is how boring it was at first. Yes, boring. After the terror faded and before the starvation set in, there was just waiting. Day after day in that cramped, smoky shelter. We played cards with stained pieces of paper. We told stories. Some people prayed. Others just stared at the walls. And then the snow fell again. It came in waves. Every few days, another blizzard. It built up until we had to dig tunnels between the cabins. You couldn't go outside without a rope tied to your waist in case you got lost in the white. The snow isolated us, not just from the world, but from each other. The Donners were stuck 6 miles back near Alder Creek. They'd broken a wagon axle and never caught up before the storm hit. We could barely reach them. Their camp turned into its own desperate world. Some of their group tried to walk to our shelters only to collapse in the snow. A few made it. Others didn't. We started naming the days not by date but by what we lost. That was the day the Breen baby got sick. That was the day we ran out of coffee. That was the day someone tried to eat a belt buckle. And then the wolves came. No, I'm not being dramatic. They really did. We saw their tracks circling the cabins at night, wide paws too close for comfort. Someone swore they saw yellow eyes watching from the tree line. A few people tied knives to sticks and stood watch, though I'm not sure anyone had the strength to fight if it came to that. We ate the last oxen in December. After that, the real hunger began. Have you ever seen a person go quiet from hunger? Not sleepy quiet. Like the body just shuts down all the noise to conserve energy. That's what we all became. Slow, pale, quiet shadows of ourselves. One night, we melted snow and passed it around in a single cup, 1 sip each. That was dinner. Then, there was Mary Graves. She tried to hold it together for her younger siblings, kept pretending everything would be fine. She'd smile and say, "California is just over that ridge." But her voice kept cracking. And one day, she just sat by the window, watching the storm. Didn't say a word, just watched. The only bright spot, if you can call it that, was the dreams. People dreamed a lot. Dreams about cities full of food, bread raining from the sky, banquets with roast turkeys walking around like pets. I had a dream where I ate a pillow, woke up chewing my sleeve. Odd fact. Some people claimed the snow made them forget things, names, directions, even what day it was. One woman swore she forgot the color of her mother's hair. Maybe the cold reaches into your brain and takes things. I remember one afternoon in mid-December, the clouds cleared for a few hours. The sun came out. We all stumbled outside like survivors of a long war, blinking in the light. It was beautiful. The snow sparkled. The trees dripped with melting icicles. Someone said, maybe this is the break we needed. It wasn't. The clouds rolled back in by nightfall, heavier than ever. And the next morning, someone said the words we'd all been avoiding. If no one goes for help, we're going to die here. That's when we started talking about a group leaving, walking out on snowshoes, carrying what little they could. We called them the Forlorn Hope. Even the name was a prayer whispered through chattering teeth. Gnawing hunger, growing fear. Food vanished. Trust broke, and every sound outside the cabin became a threat. If you've never truly starved, let me try to explain it to you. Hunger isn't just a pain in your belly. That goes away after the first few days. What follows is a kind of unraveling. Your body becomes this hollow thing, weak, cold, strange. But the mind turns on itself. You start to think about food constantly, not in words, but in pictures. Glazed ham, hot bread, apples so fresh you can feel the crunch in your molars. Your dreams taste better than reality. Then you stop dreaming. After the Forlorn Hope set off a group of 15 with makeshift snowshoes and scraps of food, we were left behind in the snow-smothered silence, waiting to see if they'd make it. Every day they were gone. Something inside us faded. A little more hope scraped off like frost from a window pane. We were running out of everything food fuel trust. You'd think hardship would bring people closer. But no, it separated us. Every family turned inward, guarding what little they had, whispering behind closed cabin doors. We stopped sharing fires, stopped checking in on each other. People started accusing others of hoarding. And maybe they were. One morning, we found someone sneaking around near the Breen's cache of dried meat. There was shouting. Someone pulled a rifle. It didn't go off, but it made the message clear: trust no one. The Donners, back at Alder Creek, were in worse shape. One of the teamsters, Luis, lost both feet to frostbite. George Donner had a wounded hand that went black. Tamsin Donner. His wife tried to nurse everyone her own children, strangers' children. I don't know how she did it. There was nothing to feed them, and yet she kept on. Historians still debate whether the Donners had a chance to rejoin us before the worst storms hit. Some think they chose to stay behind to protect their cattle, thinking the weather would break. But we'll never know what calculations went through their heads. All we knew was that their firelight glowed dimmer each night, until we couldn't see it at all. Around Christmas, things took a darker turn. One morning, someone found bones behind a snowdrift. Not animal bones, human, picked clean. People acted like they didn't see them. No one said the word, not yet. But we all felt it hovering in the air. I remember Eliza Williams, sitting in the corner of the cabin, staring at her hands. "I'd rather die," she whispered. "I'd rather die than do that." But a few days later, when the stew pot smelled different and the meat was strangely tender, she didn't ask questions. None of us did. Odd fact. Some people tried to make shoes out of tree bark soaked in water and ashes. Said it helped preserve the soles of their feet on the snow. One man even tried to chew the bark after walking in it. Said it tasted like boiled sadness. We were losing our grip, not just on sanity, but on language, on memory. I watched a grown man forget his sister's name. I watched a child ask if heaven had crackers. We burned everything that would burn: ox yokes, wagons, the books we carried west, even the tent canvas. The smoke smelled like despair, greasy and heavy and permanent. Every time the wind howled through the trees, someone would jerk awake. Did you hear that they'd whisper? We'd all freeze. Was it the forlorn hope returning? Was it wolves? Or worse, was it something human? I'll never forget the day someone knocked at the door. It was January. We hadn't seen a soul for weeks. The knock was slow, deliberate. Someone opened the cabin door, and there stood one of the Forlorn Hope survivors. Just one. She looked like a ghost wrapped in animal hide. Lips cracked, eyes swollen. She tried to speak, and the words didn't come out, just a croak and a cry. We pulled her inside and gave her melted snow to drink. Later, she told us the rest were still out there, dead, dying, or worse. She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. The next few weeks were a blur. We waited. We counted days using notches on wood. We started measuring time by loss. That was the day Billy died. That was the day the Graves girl went blind. That was the day the wind sounded like a baby crying. Sometimes I still hear that sound. When the snow finally stopped falling for a stretch, we thought maybe now. Maybe someone will come. And then one morning, we heard a voice, faint but real. A man's voice calling out from beyond the trees. I cried. I'm not ashamed of it. I cried so hard I thought I might break open. It was a rescue party. Real people. With food. With blankets. With hope. They couldn't take all of us. Only the weakest and sickest. The rest of us had to wait. But at least now, we knew someone knew we were here. And someone was coming back. Of course, by then, it was too late for some. A few had stopped speaking altogether. Others had gone silent in a permanent way, covered in blankets, buried under snow. The hunger wasn't gnawing anymore. It was just there. An emptiness we carried like a second body. I thought we'd survived the worst, but I was wrong. The worst was what we would have to remember. The forlorn hope. I watched them march into white nothingness, praying someone would return. They left before dawn, when the snow was still crusted over and the world looked like a frozen painting. 15 of them strapped with makeshift snowshoes and what little food we could scrape together. We called them the Forlorn Hope because, well, that's exactly what they were. A last shot, a blind prayer, a thread we sent into the dark, hoping something, anything, would tug back. Some were young, like William Murphy, just 12. Some were parents leaving their kids behind. Some were strangers who'd become like family. Each of them knew the odds. They weren't walking toward safety. They were walking through death in hopes of outrunning it. They left with jerky flint, a rifle or two, and hearts full of lies we all told ourselves. It's only 20 miles to Sutter's Fort, someone said. It was closer to 90. I stood outside with a few others and watched them vanish into the trees. Their footprints filled in with snow behind them, like the mountain was trying to erase them. One of the kids waved back. I wish they hadn't. Over the next few days, every creak in the trees sounded like footsteps. Every howl of wind became a voice. We sat in silence, listening for signs they were alive. And when the snow fell again, harder than ever, I think we all knew some of them wouldn't be coming back. The thing no one tells you about waiting is how loud it gets. Not with sound, but with thoughts. Every what if echoes like thunder. Did we send the wrong people? Did we send them too soon? Did we just kill them? Historians still debate who suggested the snowshoe expedition in the first place. Some say it was Mary Graves, desperate to save her siblings. Others think it came from Patrick Breen, who couldn't bear to watch his family wither. Truth is, it didn't matter. We all agreed someone had to try. Days turned into weeks. We started hearing strange stories. The survivors who made it back from Forlorn Hope, only 7 out of 15, talked about what happened out there, but only in pieces. The blizzards, the hunger, the madness. Some fell, some froze. And yes, when the food ran out, they turned to the unthinkable. They ate the dead. They said it quietly like a sin whispered in church. We did what we had to, one of them murmured. They were already gone. It didn't shock us, not really. Hunger dulls your capacity for horror. And truth be told, we'd already started down that same road back at camp. Still hearing it spoken aloud did something to the room. No one met anyone's eyes for a while. Odd fact. One of the men reportedly refused to eat human flesh even while dying. He claimed he'd rather starve than become a cannibal. He starved. He died. But some of us quietly wondered, was he strong or just foolish? When the first rescuer reached us, it wasn't in a grand way. No trumpet. No hero's charge. Just a tired man with a beard, a heavy coat, and eyes that looked older than the mountains. He said there were others coming with food and sleds. I hugged him. I didn't even know his name, but I hugged him like he was my brother. He told us what the Forlorn Hope survivors had done to make it, what they'd left behind. And then he asked, who's ready to leave? That was the hardest question of all, because not all of us could leave. Some were too weak to walk. Some had children they refused to abandon. Some were just too broken to try. So the rescuers did what they could. They took a few promised to return and disappeared into the snow again. I stayed, not because I wanted to, because my sister couldn't walk, and I wasn't going to leave her in that frozen tomb. Not after everything. We counted the days by firewood. We'd measure a log and say 3 more burns and then morning. We ran out faster than we thought. One morning, a woman tried to climb the ridge alone. She thought she saw smoke on the other side. She never made it back. Another day, someone told a joke. Can you believe that? A joke about a priest, a fur trapper, and a barmaid. It was the worst joke I've ever heard, and we laughed so hard we cried. It didn't matter that it wasn't funny. It was noise. It was something other than waiting. That night, We shared the last biscuit crumb we had left. The wind howled like wolves. We howled with it. By the end of January, the snow had started to shift. Not melt exactly, but settle. That's when more rescue parties began to reach us. Each time they looked more horrified than the last. One man, I swear, cried when he saw us. Just stood there in the doorway, frozen, whispering, "Dear God." They took more of us. Slowly, carefully. The ones who could still walk, or at least be dragged. But every trip was a gamble. One child died on the way down the slope. Another went missing entirely, slipped off the path in the fog. They never found her. And still, the forlorn hope survivors kept returning with the rescuers guiding them back, walking the same route again and again. I don't know how they had the strength. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they just couldn't stop until we were all out. I remember seeing Mary Graves again. She looked older, not in years, but in soul. She smiled when she saw me, but her eyes didn't. That's when I realized some of us would leave these mountains, but none of us would ever leave them behind. The cost of survival. When rescue finally came, we didn't cheer. We counted the missing. When we finally descended from the mountains, it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like leaving a graveyard. There was no dramatic music, no slow-motion joy, no warm California sun waiting for us. The snow still clung to our boots. The hunger still knotted in our bellies. And the people we lost, well, they were still up there buried in the snow or inside it. The fourth and final rescue party came in April. April. That's how long we were in those mountains, from late October until spring. By the time they reached the remaining survivors, only a handful of us were still alive at the lake. The rest had died. Some were buried, some weren't. You'd step through the snow and find a shoe, or a sleeve, or worse. They pulled us out one by one. Some children couldn't walk anymore, their legs so thin they looked like sticks under a blanket. Adults had to be carried on makeshift litters. A few of us could still stand on our own, but we walked like ghosts. Slow, quiet, careful. The rescuers brought food. Not much, but enough. I cried the first time I had a bite of real bread again. Not because it tasted good, it didn't. My mouth was too raw. But because it reminded me of a world where people ate without fear. We didn't talk much on the trail down. What was there to say? We weren't heroes. We weren't victims. We were just people who had seen too much. That last stretch of snow, that final descent, I remember thinking, how did this happen? Historians still debate whether the Donner Party tragedy was caused more by poor choices or just brutal fate. Could we have made it with better leadership? If Reed hadn't pushed for Hastings' route, if we'd left a week earlier, maybe, but none of that mattered by the time we reached the valley. The real weight wasn't the snow anymore. It was the names missing from the roll call. We kept asking, did so-and-so make it? And getting silence. Franklin Graves, Jacob Donner, Sarah Foster. The list stretched longer than our shadows. Even some who had been rescued didn't survive the trip out. One little girl died in her mother's arms, just miles from safety. One man gave away all his food to others and passed away in the night, smiling like he'd finished something important. Odd fact. A few survivors later became minor celebrities. People invited them to dinner parties, asked them to tell the story, like it was some kind of fireside fable. One woman even got a marriage proposal from a man who said he admired her strength under pressure. She declined. For many of us, the world after the mountain felt too loud, too fast. People whispered behind our backs. Children pointed. Strangers asked if the rumors were true. Did you really? We didn't answer. Not because we were ashamed, but because the truth wasn't simple. Some did what they had to. Some never did. Some still lived with the memories of what others did to survive. Some didn't make it out at all. We were called cannibals. We were called cursed. One preacher claimed we had brought the wrath of God upon ourselves by traveling on a Sunday. Another said it was a lesson for all Americans to never challenge the frontier without divine permission. But none of those people had been there. They hadn't felt the way your stomach curls inward on itself, or how cold your bones get when there's nothing left to burn, not even hope. They hadn't watched a friend go to sleep beside them and never wake up. They hadn't carried the silence back with them. That's why, when I got to Sutter's Fort, I didn't celebrate. I walked past the gates, nodded at the guards, and found a quiet patch of grass to sit on. I just sat there, watched the sunrise, felt warm air touch my skin again. Someone handed me a cup of water. I drank it, and then I cried. Not for me. I was alive. I cried for the ones who weren't. There were 87 of us who started. Only 48 survived. The cost of survival isn't just paid in blood or broken bodies. It's paid in the remembering. Every spring, when the snow starts to melt, I still wonder if something new will be uncovered up there. A boot, a button, a story no one heard before. But mostly, I just hope the mountain forgets us, that it covers us with flowers instead of frost, because we already gave it everything we had. What they said about us, even after surviving, we weren't allowed to just live. We were dissected, judged, and turned into cautionary tales. If you think the mountain was cruel, wait until you meet the newspapers. We thought surviving was the hard part. Turns out, explaining it to the world was harder. Word of the Donner Party reached California before we even got out. People knew. Or rather, they thought they knew. By the time I stepped into a town with dirt streets and curious eyes, the story had already taken on a life of its own. I was no longer me. I was a character in someone else's drama. Some folks called us tragic. Some called us monsters. We became headlines. Cannibals in the Sierra. Terrible fate of the immigrants. Parents devour children to survive. They loved that last one, never mind that it wasn't true. Historians still debate just how much of the early reporting was exaggerated. Some of the accounts were based on third-hand stories, twisted and sensationalized. Others were just plain lies. But facts didn't matter much. People wanted a story they could gasp at over tea. I once overheard a man say, "The Donners brought this on themselves. Fancy wagons, fancy talk thought they were better than the rest." That was the story he liked. The moral tale, pride before the fall. But the real story, the one with broken families, quiet sacrifices, and days spent chewing on leather. Too quiet. Too uncomfortable. So they turned us into caution signs. Children were told, "Eat your supper, or you'll end up like the Donners." Travelers were warned, "Don't take shortcuts, or you'll end up like the Donners." We became folklore. We became fear. Even among the survivors, there were rifts. Some people never spoke again. Some changed their names. One man moved east and told people he was a blacksmith from Ohio. Never mentioned the mountain, never mentioned the snow. And you know what? I don't blame him. I tried to write my story once, sat down with paper and ink, and stared at the blank page for hours. My hand wouldn't move. What was I supposed to write? Dear reader, I was there. It was real. I'm sorry. I folded the page and never touched it again. Odd fact. One survivor became a teacher. She used to tell her students, "You can survive almost anything if you keep your mind intact." She never talked about what she did in the cabins, but her eyes told the whole story. And some, like James Reed, remember him. He actually thrived. After being banished for killing a man, he ended up helping lead the rescue parties. People called him a hero, which is complicated to say the least. He did try to save us, but he also pushed us toward the shortcut in the first place. History is funny like that. It lets some people wear medals and makes others wear scars. People asked me if I forgave the mountain. I don't know if that's even the right question. The mountain wasn't cruel. It was indifferent. It didn't care if we lived or died. It didn't whisper threats in the night. It didn't plan any of it. It just was. What I can't forgive, what still keeps me awake sometimes, is how quickly people forgot the names of the ones who didn't make it. Franklin Graves, Elizabeth Donner, Lemuel Murphy, Sarah Keyes. Not just bones in the snow. They had voices. They had jokes. They had dreams about farms and babies and apple pie. They mattered, and so did we. Not because we were famous, not because of what we did or didn't eat, but because we endured, because we stared death in the face and didn't blink, because we carried each other, sometimes literally, when there was no more strength left, because we chose again and again to hope. And that maybe more than anything is what no one really understood about the Donner Party. We didn't survive because we were strong. We survived because we refused to stop loving each other, even when it hurt, even when it cost us everything, even when the world watching from the safety of distance forgot we were human. It's quiet now. The snow melted, the cabins collapsed, the forest grew back, but I still see it in dreams and in memory. The hollowed wagons, the smoke trailing into frozen sky, the faces blurred by frost and time. The mountain doesn't speak, but it never lets go either. It just waits. And I remember the sound of boots on snow, the way soup boiled when there was nothing left in the pot, the hush that fell when a name stopped being spoken because the person behind it was gone. I tell this story not to haunt you, not to shock you, but so that you'll remember them, all of them, the quiet mothers, the stubborn fathers, the children who laughed at snowflakes before they learned what snow could take, and the ones who walked away and carried the mountain with them for the rest of their lives. We weren't perfect. We were desperate. We were cold. We were scared. But we were real. Flesh, bone, spirit, refusing to disappear without a fight. So the next time you hear someone say, "The Donner Party," don't just think of hunger and horror. Think of hands held in the dark, of songs sung over dying fires, of the choice to keep going one step at a time, because sometimes survival isn't loud. It's quiet and soft and brave in ways history will never fully understand.